The smell of frozen earth and crushed yarrow clung to Elara's fingers as she scraped the last of the bone broth from the pot, tilting it toward the candlelight to make sure she caught every drop. The bowl she filled was chipped, a jagged line running through the painted bluebell pattern, and the broth inside was thin, more water than anything. But it was warm, and the woman lying on the cot in the root cellar beneath her feet needed warm things more than she needed calories tonight. 3 winters. Elara had kept the old woman alive through 3 winters in a space dug for storing turnips and preserves, a cellar so low-ceilinged that neither of them could stand upright. The trapdoor sat beneath a braided rug in the kitchen, and above that rug, Elara had placed a heavy oak table she could barely move. Every night, she dragged it aside. Every morning, she dragged it back. Her knees ached as she knelt and pulled the rug free. The trapdoor's iron ring was wrapped in cloth to keep it from clanking, and she lifted it with the careful silence of someone who had practiced this motion 1,000 times. Damp air rose to meet her, carrying the scent of root vegetables, tallow candles, and something else. Something like dried lavender and tall old wool. That was Maren's smell, the banished mother of the Alpha King. Elara descended the 5 wooden steps, with the bowl balanced in one hand and a folded blanket tucked under her arm. The cellar was perhaps 10 feet by 8, its walls lined with shelves she had repurposed to hold medicines, dried herbs, books with water-stained pages, and 3 jars of wildflower honey she had been rationing since October. A single tallow candle burned on an overturned crate beside the cot, and in its guttering light, Maren's face looked like crumpled parchment, pale, thin, the bones of her cheeks pressing through skin that had gone translucent with age and illness. But her eyes were open, and they were the color of dark amber, and they tracked Elara with a sharpness that her body could no longer match. "You are late tonight," Maren said. Her voice was a dry whisper, like pages turning. Elara set the bowl on the crate and knelt beside the cot. The stone floor bit into her knees through her threadbare skirt. "I had to wait for Councilman Falk to leave. He came by the garden again, asked about the lavender." Maren's eyes narrowed. "What did you tell him?" "That I grow it for the apothecary in Millhaven." Same as always. Maren's hand, thin as a bundle of sticks, found Elara's wrist. The old woman's grip was surprisingly firm. "He does not come for the lavender, child. He comes because he smells something on this land that should not be here. An old wolf. A banished one." Elara's stomach tightened. She had known this, of course. Had known it for months. Falk was the beta councilman of the Ashenmore pack, and his nose was sharper than most. But what could she do? She could not move Maren. The woman could barely sit up to eat, and the nearest safe territory was 60 miles of mountain road that would kill her before the first pass. "Eat," Elara said, lifting the bowl. "We will worry about Falk tomorrow." Maren ate slowly, each swallow a visible effort, and Elara watched the candlelight play over the scars on the old woman's forearms. Banishment scars. 3 parallel lines cut into the skin by the pack's ceremonial blade, the wounds deliberately infected with wolfsbane so they would never heal clean. Every banished wolf carried them. The marks meant you were erased, your name struck from the pack register, your blood disowned, your wolf severed from the pack bond so completely that most banished wolves went mad within a year. Maren had survived 12 years. Elara still did not fully understand how. When the bowl was empty, Elara wiped Maren's chin with a corner of the blanket and tucked it around her shoulders. The old woman caught her hand again. "The flowers," Maren said. "Are they still blooming?" Elara hesitated. It was the dead of February. Nothing bloomed in February in the northern territories. Nothing except the strange pale flowers that had begun pushing through the frozen soil of Elara's garden 3 years ago, almost to the day she had found Maren collapsed in the woods behind her cottage. The flowers were small, 5-petaled, with a luminescence that made them look like fallen stars in the moonlight. They had no name in any herbalism book Elara owned. They grew only in the plot directly above the root cellar, as if feeding on something beneath the soil. "They are," Elara said quietly. Maren closed her eyes. "Good. That means she is still protecting us." Elara did not ask who she was. Maren said things like this sometimes, fragments of sentences that pointed toward a story she had never fully told. Elara had learned not to push. The old woman would share when she was ready, or she would die with her secrets folded inside her like letters never sent, and either way, Elara's job was to keep her warm and fed and hidden. That was the arrangement. That was all it had ever been. Elara climbed back up, replaced the trapdoor, pulled the rug flat, and dragged the oak table back into position. Her arms trembled with the effort. She had lost weight this winter. Her hip bones pressed against her waistband, and when she caught her reflection in the window glass, she saw someone who looked 10 years older than 23. Hollowed cheeks, dark circles like bruises beneath grey eyes. Hair that had once been thick enough to braid twice around her head now hung lank and dull past her shoulders. She had stopped looking in mirrors 2 winters ago. The cottage was small, 2 rooms and the kitchen. No running water, though the well out back still worked if you cranked the handle with both hands. She had inherited the property from the woman who had employed her as a live-in caretaker and herbalist's assistant, old Sefa, who had died in her sleep 4 years ago and left Elara the cottage in a verbal promise that no one in the Ashenmoor pack recognized as legally binding. They let her stay because the cottage was worthless, because the land was rocky and far from the pack's central village, because Elara herself was worthless to them, an omega with no wolf. That was what they called her, what they had always called her. She had been found as an infant on the border of Ashenmoor territory, wrapped in a blanket with no markings, no note, no name. The pack had taken her in reluctantly and assigned her to the orphan rotation, passed from household to household every few months like a piece of furniture no one wanted, but felt too guilty to throw away. At 16, the age when every wolf in the pack undergoes their first shift, Elara had stood in the ceremonial circle and felt nothing. No heat, no surge, no wolf rising inside her. The pack elders had waited. The alpha had waited. The moon had hung fat and silver above the pines, and Elara had stood there, shivering, ordinary, empty. No wolf, no value, no place. Sefa had taken her in the next day. The old herbalist had no pack standing either. A human woman married to a wolf who had died decades ago, tolerated on the territory's edge because she made useful poultices and asked no questions. For 3 years, Elara had learned to identify every root, bark, and blossom within walking distance. She learned to set bones, brew tinctures for fever, pack wounds with yarrow and honey. Sefa taught her to read the old texts, the ones written in the language of the first wolves, and Elara had discovered she could decipher them faster than Sefa herself. "You have an old soul," Sefa had said once, squinting at Elara over a mug of willow bark tea. "Or an old bloodline. Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference." Then Sefa had died, and Elara had been alone. And then she had found Maren. The night she found her, Elara had been gathering winter chanterelles in the woods behind the cottage. The mushrooms grew in clusters at the base of dead oaks, their orange caps bright against the snow, and Elara was on her knees, scraping one free when she heard the sound. A low, rattling breath, like air being pulled through a collapsed straw. She had followed it to a shallow ravine where a woman lay face down in the frozen mud, wearing nothing but a torn shift, her feet bare and bloody, the banishment scars on her forearms so inflamed they wept clear fluid. Elara had carried her home on her back. The woman weighed almost nothing. It was not until the next morning, when Maren was conscious enough to speak, that Elara learned who she was. Maren Ashwood, former Luna of the Iron Peak Pack. Mother of Kyle Ashwood, the Alpha King who ruled all 7 northern territories from his fortress at Stonecrest. Banished 12 years ago by her own mate, Alpha Aldrich, for reasons Maren would not discuss except to say, "I chose my son's future over his father's pride," and Aldrich could not forgive that. Elara had heard of the Alpha King. Everyone had. Kyle Ashwood, the youngest wolf ever to claim the high throne, barely 20 when he challenged and killed the previous king in single combat. That had been 8 years ago. In the years since, he had unified the warring northern packs under a single rule, crushed 3 rebellions, and built a reputation so fearsome that even the southern territories sent tribute. They called him the Iron Wolf, the king who does not kneel, the beast of Stonecrest. They also said he had been looking for his mother since the day of his coronation, that he had sent scouts to every corner of the wolf territories, that he had offered a fortune in gold to anyone who could bring him word of her, alive or dead. Elara had considered, briefly sending word. But Maren had begged her not to. "If Kyle finds me, he will come." "For me," Maren had said, gripping Elara's wrist with those stick-thin fingers. "And if he comes, he will learn the truth about his father, about what Aldrich did. And then my son will burn the world to the ground, and I cannot have more blood on my hands. Promise me. Promise me you will tell no one." Elara had promised. 3 winters. 3 winters of scraping by, of rationing her herb sales to feed 2 mouths, of stealing heat from the main pack's wood stores when no one was looking. 3 winters of Councilman Falk circling closer with his sharp nose and his thin smile and his questions about the lavender. 3 winters of those strange, luminous flowers spreading through her garden like a slow, beautiful plague. Elara was eating the last of her own dinner, a crust of bread soaked in broth, when the knock came. It was past midnight. No one came to the cottage past midnight. No one came to the cottage at all, really, except the occasional villager needing a remedy for a child's cough or a mate's headache. And they came during daylight, apologetic, quick, as if touching Elara's threshold might contaminate them. The knock came again, 3 sharp raps. Elara set down her bread, wiped her hands on her skirt, checked that the rug was flat over the trap door, that the table was flush. Then she crossed to the door and opened it the width of her palm. Cold air hit her face, carrying the scent of pine resin, horse sweat, and something else. Something that made her vision blur and her pulse stutter, like standing too close to a bonfire, like pressing your palms against stone that had been sitting in full sun for hours. A warmth that had no physical source, that sank through her skin and settled in her bones and made every nerve in her body light up with an alertness she had never experienced. 2 men stood on her doorstep. The one on the left was tall, lean, with close-cropped silver hair and the watchful eyes of a career soldier. He wore leather armor and a sword at his hip and said nothing. The one on the right was something else entirely. He was enormous, not just tall, though he was that at least 6.5 feet, but broad in a way that made the doorframe look like it had been built for a child. His shoulders filled the space between the jambs. His hands, visible at his sides, were scarred across the knuckles, the kind of scars you get from hitting things that hit back. He wore a dark coat with a wolf's head clasp at the throat, and beneath it, a simple black tunic stretched across a chest that looked like it had been carved from ironwood. His hair was black, cut short at the sides and longer on top, and his jaw was sharp enough to cast its own shadow. But it was his eyes that stopped her, golden, not brown with flecks of gold, not hazel. Pure, liquid gold, like molten metal poured into the sockets of a face that had been designed by something older and more dangerous than nature. Those eyes caught the candlelight from behind her and reflected it back, and for a moment Elara felt the air leave her lungs as if someone had pressed a hand flat against her sternum. The man's nostrils flared. His jaw tightened. Something shifted behind those golden eyes, a flash of raw, unguarded shock, and then his entire body went rigid. "Mate," he said the word like it had been torn from his throat. Low, rough, almost involuntary. Like a reflex, not a choice. Elara's hand tightened on the door. No, the word was out before she could think, before she could process what she was feeling. Because she was feeling it too. The warmth, the pull, the way her body was leaning toward this stranger, as if drawn by a current she could not see. Something inside her chest, something she had never known existed, was straining toward him like a root reaching for water. But she could not. She could not have a mate. Not now. Not with Maren 10 feet below her kitchen floor, and the Alpha King's scouts searching every territory in the north. The man's golden eyes narrowed. His companion shifted uneasily. "You know who I am?" the tall man said. It was not a question. Elara looked at him, at the wolf's head clasp, at the way the silver-haired soldier stood half a step behind, the posture of a man guarding a king. "Alpha King Cale Ashwood," she said. Her voice sounded steady. She did not feel steady. She felt like the ground was dissolving beneath her feet. "You are a long way from Stonecrest." Kael did not smile. His gaze moved over her face, down to the hand gripping the door, to the hollow at the base of her throat where her pulse was hammering visibly. His jaw worked. His nostrils flared again. And this time she saw something almost pained cross his features. "You are starving," he said. "I am fine." "You are not fine." His voice dropped, and the authority in it was absolute. Not performative, not theatrical. Simply the voice of someone who had never in his life been contradicted and could not quite fathom that it was happening now. "I can hear your heartbeat. I can smell your blood." "When did you last eat a full meal?" Elara did not answer. She could not remember. The silver-haired soldier cleared his throat. "My king, perhaps we should explain why we are here." Kael did not look at him. His eyes had not left Elara's face. "I know why I am here, Ren." He paused. His hand came up slowly, as if to touch her, and she flinched. He stopped. The muscles in his forearm corded beneath the skin. "What is your name?" "Elara." She swallowed. "Why are you at my door?" "Because I have been tracking a scent for 600 miles, and it ends here." Kael's golden eyes bore into hers. "Do not lie to me. I can hear the lie before it leaves your lips. There is a wolf on this land. An old wolf. Banished. I have been searching for her for 8 years." Elara's blood turned to ice. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her mind raced through the options and found none. She could deny it. But he had just said he could hear lies. She could run. But to where? She could scream. But who would come? "I do not know what you are talking about," she said. His face did something she did not expect. It crumpled, not with anger, with grief. The shift was so brief she almost missed it. A twitch at the corner of his mouth, a tightening around his eyes. And then it was gone, replaced by the granite mask of a king who had learned long ago that emotion was a vulnerability. "My mother's name is Maren Ashwood," he said. "She was banished by my father 12 years ago. I have turned over every stone in every territory looking for her. I have interrogated hundreds of wolves. I have followed false trails across mountains and rivers and borders. And 600 miles ago, one of my scouts found a merchant in Millhaven who buys rare herbal tinctures from a woman living alone on the edge of Ashenmoor territory. Tinctures made with old knowledge, the kind of knowledge my mother used to have." He paused. "I rode for 11 days to get here. I have not slept in 3 of them. If she is here, if she is alive, I am asking you to let me see her. Not as a king, as her son." Elara stood in the doorway, with the cold cutting through her dress and the mate bond burning in her chest, and the weight of a promise pressing against her throat. She had promised Maren, she had promised, and this man, this terrifying golden-eyed man, whose very presence made the air thick and electric, was Maren's son. The son Maren loved so fiercely that she had chosen banishment over betraying his future. The son she whispered about in her fever dreams, calling his name in the dark of the root cellar, while Elara pressed cool cloths to her forehead. Elara stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. The cottage was too small for him. That was the first absurd thought that crossed Elara's mind as Kyle Ashwood ducked through the doorway. His head nearly brushed the ceiling beams. The room that had always felt adequate suddenly felt like a matchbox, every surface too close, every piece of furniture too fragile. Wren stayed outside. A glance from Kyle, and the soldier took up position by the door without a word. Kyle stood in the center of her kitchen. His eyes moved over everything. The cracked bowl in the basin, the thin curtains over the windows, the single stub of candle providing the only light, the braided rug on the floor. He looked down at the rug. His nostrils flared. "She is beneath us," he said. His voice cracked on the last word, a fracture so small and so deep it sounded like ice breaking on a river. "Right now, she is right beneath us." Elara knelt and pulled the rug aside. She dragged the table, and this time her arms shook so badly she nearly dropped it. A large, scarred hand closed over hers and moved the table as if it weighed nothing. Kyle set it aside without looking at it. His eyes were fixed on the trapdoor. Elara lifted the iron ring. The door swung up. The smell of tallow candles and dried lavender and old wool rose into the kitchen. Kyle went to his knees beside the opening. For a long moment, he did not move. He just knelt there, this massive, terrifying king, on the bare wood floor of a cottage that was held together with stubbornness and prayer, staring into a root cellar. Then he lowered himself through the opening. Elara heard his boots hit the stone floor, heard a sharp intake of breath, and then silence. She should not go down. This was their moment, mother and son, and she had no place in it. But she could not stay up here either, standing in her kitchen, with the cold coming through the walls, and the mate bond thrumming beneath her ribs like a second heartbeat. She sat on the floor beside the open trapdoor and listened. Maren's voice drifted up, thin and wondering. "Kyle, my boy. And then a sound that made Alara's eyes burn. A sob, a single, ragged sob from a man who sounded like he had not cried since childhood, who sounded like the mechanism for crying had rusted shut inside him and was being forced open now, painfully, with the screech of metal on metal. "I found you," he said. His voice was thick, barely recognizable. "I found you. Do not cry, baby. Oh, do not cry. I am here. You weigh nothing. You feel like paper. What have they done to you?" "Nothing was done to me that I did not choose." A long silence. Then Kael's voice, lower, harder. "Who took care of you?" "The girl," Maren said. "The girl upstairs. She saved my life. She has saved it every day for 3 years." Another silence, then footsteps on the cellar floor, and Kael's face appeared in the trapdoor opening. He pulled himself up and stood in the kitchen, and Alara scrambled to her feet. He looked different now. The granite mask was gone. What was underneath was rawer than she had expected. Not soft. Nothing about this man was soft, but cracked. Vulnerable in the way that a wall is vulnerable after a siege, still standing but showing the places where the stones had been knocked loose. He looked at her, and the gold of his eyes was molten. 3 years, he said. Yes, you hid her, fed her, kept her alive, in a root cellar, while your own body starved. Alara said nothing. There was nothing to say. He stepped toward her. She did not step back this time. He reached out and took her hand, turning it palm up, and she flinched because his fingers were warm. Warm in a way that felt impossible in this frozen cottage, as if his blood ran hotter than any fire she could build. He looked at her hand, the calluses, the cracks in her skin, the red, chapped knuckles. His thumb traced a line across her palm, and the touch sent a shock up her arm so acute that her vision whited out for a fraction of a second. "Mate," he said again, and this time the word was not torn from him. This time he said it with his full voice, with deliberation, with a weight that made the air in the cottage vibrate. "You are my mate." "I cannot be," Alara whispered. His eyes searched her face. "Why?" "Because I have no wolf. I am nobody. I am an omega with no wolf, living on the edge of a territory that barely tolerates my existence, and your mother is dying in my root cellar, and I promised her I would not contact you, and you are the Alpha King, and I am." She stopped. Her throat closed. "I am nothing." Kael's hand tightened around hers, not enough to hurt, just enough to make it clear that he was not letting go. "You are the woman who kept my mother alive when every wolf in every pack in every territory failed her," he said. "You are the woman who starved herself to feed someone else's mother for 3 years. You are my mate, and you are coming with me." She shook her head. "I cannot leave. Your mother cannot travel. She is too weak. And Councilman Falk has been watching this cottage. If he sees you here, if he reports it to the Ashenmoor Alpha, there will be consequences." Kael's expression changed. The vulnerability receded, and something harder took its place. Something ancient and predatory. "Falk," he said. "He is the Beta Councilman of Ashenmoor. He has been suspicious for months. He comes to the cottage and asks questions about my herbs, but really he is scenting the air." Kael released her hand. He walked to the window and looked out into the darkness. The moonlight caught the scar that ran along the left side of his jaw, a thin white line from ear to chin. When he turned back, his eyes were no longer gold. They were burning amber, the color of a wolf's eyes in the moment before the shift. His wolf was close to the surface. "I will deal with Falk," he said. I will deal with Ashenmore. But first, I need to know what you know about my mother's banishment." Elara hesitated. This was the thing Maren had been afraid of. The truth that she believed would make her son burn the world. "She told me very little," Elara said carefully. "Only that your father banished her because she chose your future over his pride." Kael's jaw tightened. "That is what she told me too, the one letter she managed to send before she disappeared. I have spent 8 years trying to understand what it means." From below, Maren's voice rose through the open trap door, thin but clear. "Tell him, Elara. It is time. I am dying anyway. Let my son have the truth." Kael moved back to the trap door and knelt beside it. He looked down at his mother, and Elara saw his hand grip the edge of the opening so tightly the wood creaked. "Your father wanted to sell the Iron Peak bloodline," Maren said. Her voice was steady now, steadier than Elara had heard it in months, as if the effort of dying had stripped away all hesitation. "There was a southern warlord, Theron Blackveil, who wanted wolves with alpha bloodlines for breeding stock. Your father agreed. He was going to send 6 wolves from our pack, all of them under the age of 16, to Theron's territory. As property. As breeding chattel." Kael said nothing. A muscle in his jaw jumped. "I could not let that happen," Maren continued. "I sent word to the Wolf Council. I gave testimony. Your father was stripped of his trade agreements and humiliated in front of the Northern Alphas. He knew it was me. So he banished me. He told the pack I had committed treason. He told you I had betrayed our bloodline." "You did betray the bloodline," Kael said quietly, "but not the way he said. You protected it." "I protected children," Maren said. "That is all. I am no hero. I ran when he came for me. I could have stayed and fought, but I was afraid, and I ran, and I have been running ever since, until this girl found me in the mud and carried me on her back." Kael looked at Elara. There was something in his gaze that she had no framework for. Gratitude was too small a word. Reverence was too formal. It was more like recognition, as if he had been carrying an incomplete map his entire life, and the last piece had just fallen into place, and the picture it completed was her. "My father is dead," Kael said, turning back to the trapdoor. "He died 4 years ago. Heart failure. I felt nothing when they told me." He paused. "That is not true. I felt relief. I was ashamed of the relief. But I felt it." In the cellar, Maren made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. "Your father was not always cruel," she said. "When we were young, he used to carve wooden animals for you. Wolves, mostly. Little wolves with jointed legs that could walk when you pulled a string. He spent hours on them. Do you remember?" Kael was silent for a long time. "I remember," he said. "He stopped making them the year I was banished," Maren said. Something in his face just closed, like a door. He stopped carving, stopped singing, stopped everything except giving orders and punishing anyone who disobeyed. I think he was ashamed too, in his way. But shame made him mean instead of sorry. Elara listened to this and felt something unexpected. Not for the dead Alpha, not for Maren. For the boy who had lost both parents on the same day, one to banishment and one to the shame that hollows a person from the inside until there is nothing left but authority and anger. The night deepened. Kael carried his mother up from the root cellar, lifting her as if she were made of spun glass, and placed her on Elara's narrow bed. He tucked the blanket around her with hands that had killed men in combat, and the tenderness of the gesture was so stark against his size that Elara had to look away. "Ren!" Kyle called from the door. The silver-haired soldier appeared instantly. "Send word to Stonecrest. I need a physician here by tomorrow night. The fastest rider we have." "Yes, my king." "And Ren, find out everything about Councilman Falk of Ashenmoor. Everything." Ren's eyes flickered to Elara and back. "Understood." Kyle closed the door and turned to face the kitchen. The fire in the small hearth had died to embers, and the chill was creeping in. He moved to the wood pile and found it nearly empty. 2 split logs and a handful of kindling. He looked at Elara. "This is all the wood you have." She nodded. He stacked both logs in the hearth and blew on the embers until the flame caught. Then he pulled off his heavy coat and held it out to her. She stared at it. "Take it," he said. "You are shivering." "I am always shivering." Something tightened in his face. "Take." The coat. She took the coat. It was lined with wolf fur and smelled like pine smoke and iron, and that strange, bone-deep warmth that she was beginning to realize was simply him. The smell of her mate. She put it on, and it fell to her knees, and the residual heat from his body enveloped her like an embrace. They sat at the kitchen table. It was absurd. The Alpha King of the 7 northern territories, sitting at a cracked oak table in a cottage that was barely standing, drinking the last of Elara's yarrow tea from a chipped cup, while the woman who was apparently his fated mate sat across from him, wearing his coat like a child playing dress-up. "Tell me about yourself," Kyle said. "There is nothing to tell. There is everything to tell." "You are my mate. I want to know every single thing." She looked at him, at the golden eyes that had not stopped watching her since the moment she opened the door, at the way he held the chipped cup carefully, as if aware that his hands could crush it without thinking. "I was found as an infant on the Ashenmoor border," she said. "No parents, no name. They called me Elara because the elder who found me said I smelled like moonflowers, and Elara is the old word for moon. I was raised by the pack as a collective burden. At 16, I failed the shift ceremony. No wolf manifested. They declared me Omega, wolfless, and placed me in Sepha's care. Sepha was a human herbalist who lived here. She taught me everything I know about healing. She died 4 years ago. I have been alone since." She paused. "Until I found your mother." Kyle set down the cup. "Wolfless," he said. "Yes, that is what they told you. That is what I am." He leaned forward. The candlelight caught his eyes, and they flared. "When I walked through that door, you felt the bond." "Correct." She did not deny it. "A wolfless human cannot feel the mate bond," Kyle said. "It is impossible. The bond exists between wolves, between the animal spirits that live inside us. If you felt it, you have a wolf." "I do not shift. I have never shifted. There is nothing there." Kyle studied her. His gaze was so intense it felt physical, like a hand pressed against her cheek. "My mother has old knowledge," he said. "Older than the pack systems, older than the shift ceremonies. She knows about bloodlines that were erased from the records, wolves whose gifts were too powerful for the packs to control, so they were bred out, suppressed, forgotten." She paused. He seemed to be choosing his next words with great care. "The flowers in your garden, the ones that bloom in February. Do you know what they are?" Elara shook her head. "They are called Mother's Grave flowers. They only grow in the presence of a lunar bloodline. Not a regular lunar. A lunar of the first line. The direct descendant of the original she-wolf who birthed the packs." Elara stared at him. "That is impossible," she said. 3 days ago, I would have agreed." He held her gaze. But those flowers have not been seen in the northern territories for 200 years, and they are growing in your garden. Your mother said something similar once. She said someone was protecting us. I thought she was delirious. My mother recognizes old magic. She always has. It is why the packs feared her. It is why my father was able to convince the elders to banish her. He framed her as dangerous. Elara pulled his coat tighter around herself. Her mind was spinning. She had spent her entire life believing she was empty. That the space inside her where a wolf should live was just a hollow, a defect, a void. The idea that something might be there, something dormant, something deliberately suppressed, was too large to process in a single sitting. I do not feel powerful, she said. I feel tired. Power and exhaustion are not mutually exclusive. Kael's voice was quiet. I have been the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories for 8 years. I have not slept well in any of them. Something in his tone made her look at him differently, past the gold eyes and the battle scars and the sheer gravitational mass of him. Underneath all of it, he looked exactly like what he was. A 30-year-old man who had been carrying the weight of 7 territories on his back since he was barely an adult. Whose mother had been ripped from him, whose father had become a stranger, who had spent nearly a decade searching for the one person who had loved him without condition and had found her dying in a hole in the ground. You should sleep, Elara said. His eyes did not waver. Not without knowing you will be here when I wake up. I am not going anywhere. I have nowhere to go. That was not what I meant, he said. She understood what he meant. The bond was pulling at her, a low, constant tug beneath her ribs, and she could feel that he was feeling it too. The need to be close, the need to touch. Not in the frantic, desperate way of new lovers, but in the bone-deep way of 2 creatures who had been cold for too long and had finally found warmth. She did not touch him. She was not ready for that. But she did not move away. I will be here, she said. He slept on the floor beside her bed, where his mother lay. He folded his body onto the bare boards as if sleeping on stone was nothing to him. And perhaps it was not. Elara slept in the kitchen chair, wrapped in his coat, and woke every 2 hours to check Maren's breathing. In the grey light of early morning, she looked out the window and saw the flowers, the mother's grave flowers. They had doubled overnight. Where before they had occupied a small patch beside the cottage wall, they now covered half the garden, their pale petals luminous against the frost-blackened soil. They should not have been blooming at all. They should certainly not have been spreading, but there they were, hundreds of them, shining in the dawn like scattered pieces of the moon. The physician arrived the next evening, a lean, sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Sarah, who travelled with 2 assistants and a leather case full of instruments that clicked and gleamed in the firelight. She descended into the root cellar, examined Maren for nearly an hour, and emerged with a careful expression. She spoke to Kael outside, but Elara heard every word through the thin walls. Her lungs are compromised, long-term exposure to damp and cold. Her wolf has been dormant for years, likely since the banishment severed her pack bond. Without a functioning wolf, her healing capacity is that of a human elderly woman, which means the pneumonia that is developing in her left lung is extremely dangerous. Can you treat it? I can slow it. She needs warmth, dry air, consistent nutrition, and proximity to pack bonds. Her wolf needs stimulus to reawaken. Without it, the pneumonia will take her within weeks. Silence, then Kael's voice, hard as iron. She is not dying, not after I just found her. My king, I am telling you the medical reality. If you want to change that reality, she needs to be at Stonecrest, in the royal quarters, surrounded by pack members whose bond energy can reach her wolf, and she needs to travel within the next 3 days. After that, I cannot guarantee she will survive the journey. More silence. Elara pushed the door open and stepped out. Both of them turned to look at her. I will prepare her for travel, Elara said. Kael's gaze locked onto her. You are coming with us. It was not a question. I am coming, she said. Something eased in his face, just slightly. The next morning, Falk came. Elara was packing Maren's herbs into a saddlebag, working quickly in the cold dawn light, when she heard hoofbeats on the frozen track. She looked up and saw the councilman riding toward the cottage on a grey gelding, his thin frame wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, his expression sharp with satisfaction. Behind him rode 4 Ashen Moor pack warriors. Kael was inside with Maren. Ren stood by the door. Falk reined up 20 feet from the cottage and dismounted. His eyes swept over Ren, over the horses bearing Stonecrest markings, over the saddlebags. Well, he said. His voice was thin and precise, like a letter opener. I knew something was wrong with this place. He looked directly at the cottage. I could smell it. An old wolf, hidden. I reported it to Alpha Gregor a week ago. He sent me to investigate. Ren's hand moved to his sword. The cottage door opened, and Kael stepped out. The effect was immediate. Falk's confidence visibly crumbled. His face went the color of old bone. The 4 warriors behind him exchanged panicked glances. One of them actually took a step backward. Kael did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His presence alone was a force, a gravitational pull that bent the air around him. And when he looked at Falk, the Beta councilman flinched as if struck. You are Falk, Kael said. Falk swallowed. My king. I did not expect to find you here. Clearly. Kael walked forward. Slow. Deliberate. Each step measured. You reported the presence of a hidden wolf on this land to your Alpha. 1. Yes. I did my duty. Your duty. Kael stopped 3 feet from Falk, close enough that the man had to tilt his head back to look up at him. Tell me about your duty. Tell me about the duty you owed to a wolfless Omega living alone on the edge of your territory for 4 years. Did you bring her firewood? Did you check that she had food? Did you make sure the woman your pack discarded was surviving the winters? Falk's mouth opened, closed. She is an Omega, he said. She has no wolf. She contributes nothing to the pack. She is my mate, Kael said. And she has been keeping my mother alive in a root cellar because your pack was too cowardly and too cruel to offer either of them shelter. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses stopped moving. Falk's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock, disbelief, and then something Elara did not expect. A flicker of something that looked almost like shame. It passed quickly, replaced by the instinct of a political animal calculating angles, but it had been there. For one moment, Falk had looked like a man who had just been shown a mirror and did not like what he saw. I did not know, Falk said. His voice was smaller. About your mother. About any of this. You did not try to know, Kael said. That is worse. He turned to Ren. Escort the councilman and his wolves back to Ashenmoor's border. Inform Alpha Gregor that I will be summoning him to Stonecrest for a formal accounting of his pack's treatment of vulnerable wolves on his territory. Every Omega, every wolfless member, every orphan. I want records. Ren stepped forward. Falk backed up instinctively. And Falk. Kael's voice stopped the man mid-retreat. If anything happens to this cottage, to this land, or to any of the wolves under Ashen Moor's care while I am gone, I will hold you personally responsible. You will not enjoy the consequences. Do you understand me?" Falk nodded once, sharply, and mounted his horse. He rode away without looking back, but Alara noticed his hands were shaking on the reins. They departed that afternoon. Maren was wrapped in furs and secured in a covered wagon that Wren had procured from a nearby village. Dr. Sarah rode alongside, monitoring her breathing. Kael rode at the front of the small column on a massive black stallion that looked like it had been breeded for war. Alara rode beside the wagon on a chestnut mare that had been given to her without comment. She was wearing proper boots for the first time in 2 years. Leather, lined with sheepskin. Someone had also provided a wool cloak, thick gloves, and a scarf. She suspected Kael, though he said nothing about it. The first 3 days of travel were brutal. The mountain roads were narrow and icy, and the wind cut through every layer. Maren's coughing grew worse at night, the deep, wet sound of lungs filling with fluid, and Alara spent the dark hours in the wagon beside her, brewing steam from boiling water and eucalyptus over a small traveling brazier, draping cloths over Maren's head to create a pocket of warm, medicated air. Kael checked on them every few hours. He would appear at the wagon's canvas flap, his face wind-reddened, snowflakes in his dark hair, and look first at his mother, and then at Alara. Every time, something in his expression shifted when he looked at her. The hard lines of his face would ease, just slightly, and his eyes would warm, and the bond would pulse between them like a shared heartbeat. On the 3rd night, they stopped at a way station in the mountains, a stone building with a fireplace and 4 walls and a roof that did not leak. Alara had Maren settled by the fire and was preparing a fresh poultice for her chest when Kael sat down beside her on the stone floor. She was acutely aware of his proximity, the heat of him, the smell of him, pine and iron and something sweet beneath it, like the sap of a tree she could not name. The mate bond was a living thing between them now, a constant low hum that intensified with physical closeness until it was almost unbearable. "Tell me why you did it," he said. Alara's hands paused in their work. "Did what?" "Took her in. You did not know who she was. You found a dying stranger in the woods, and you carried her home, and you hid her for 3 years. You gave her your food, your warmth, your safety." Why? Alara thought about this. She could give him the noble answer, the selfless answer. But the truth was less clean than that. "Because I knew what it felt like," she said. "To be thrown away. To be no one." She was dying in the mud, and she had banishment scars, and I knew that whoever she was, someone had decided she was worth less than nothing. And I... She stopped. She pulled a dried eucalyptus leaf apart between her fingers, and the sharp, medicinal scent rose between them. I was 13 the last time someone touched me with kindness. Old Sefa. She used to pat my hair when I did my lessons right. After she died, no one touched me at all, not even accidentally. The pack members would step around me in the village, leaving space like I was a puddle they did not want to get their shoes wet in. 4 years of no one's hand on my shoulder, no one's arm around me. Nothing. She looked at the eucalyptus fragments in her palm, so when I found her, and she was cold, and I picked her up, and she put her arms around my neck because she was too weak to hold on without gripping. She paused. That was the first time anyone had touched me in 4 years, and I thought, I am not letting go. I am never letting go. Kael was silent for a long time. When she looked at him, his golden eyes were bright in the firelight, and his jaw was set in a way that was not anger, but something fiercer, something that burned slower and deeper. He reached out and took her hand, deliberately, firmly. His palm was broad and warm, his fingers rough with calluses, and when they closed around hers, the mate bond flared so hard that she gasped. A shock of warmth spread from the point of contact through her arm, her chest, her entire body, as if every nerve she possessed had been dormant, and was now suddenly awake. "No one," Kael said, his voice low, "will ever step around you again." He did not let go of her hand for the rest of the night. Stonecrest was not what Elara had imagined. She had pictured something brutal, a fortress of black stone and iron gates, built for war and intimidation. And it was that, from the outside. The walls were 30 feet high, the towers sharp against the winter sky, and the massive gate was flanked by guards in dark armor, who straightened to rigid attention as Kael's column approached. But inside the walls it was different. The courtyard was warm, heated by some underground system that kept the flagstones free of ice. There were gardens, even in February, glass-roofed structures filled with green plants and filtered light. The main hall had floors of polished wood and windows of stained glass that threw colored light across the walls. The fireplaces were enormous, deep enough to stand in, and they burned constantly. Maren was carried directly to the royal quarters. A suite of rooms with thick walls, heavy curtains, and a bed large enough for 3 people, piled with furs and quilts. Dr. Sarah set up her equipment. Attendants brought food, hot water, fresh linens. Within an hour, the dying woman in the root cellar was lying in the bed of a queen, surrounded by the warmth and resources that Elara had spent 3 years trying to provide, with nothing but stubbornness and turnips. Elara stood in the doorway of the suite and felt something crack inside her chest. She had kept Maren alive. But she had barely kept her alive. The cellar, the thin broth, the rationed honey, the tallow candles that smoked and left soot on the walls. She had given everything she had, and it had not been enough. It had never been enough. And now, in this warm, beautiful room, with real physicians and real food and real heat, Elara could see the full scope of how close to death Maren had actually been. She turned and walked down the hallway. She did not know where she was going. She just needed to move. She found herself in a corridor with tall windows overlooking an interior garden. The garden was covered by glass, and inside it, trees grew in defiance of the season. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. "Elara," she turned. Kael was behind her. He moved quietly for such a large man. "You walked away," he said. "I needed air." He studied her face. "You are thinking that what you gave her was not enough." She pressed her lips together. He stepped closer. "You kept her alive for 3 years on nothing. In a cellar. In the coldest territory in the north. With no money, no pack support, no wolf of your own. You did what an entire kingdom could not do. You found her. You saved her. She was dying, Kael. She has been dying the entire time. And I was too stubborn or too stupid to see how bad it really was. You saw exactly how bad it was. And you stayed anyway. Do you think that is stubbornness?" He was close now. Close enough that the heat of his body reached her through the space between them. That is strength. That is the kind of strength that has nothing to do with wolves or bloodlines or power. That is the strength of a woman who carries people. She looked up at him. Her eyes were burning. "I am tired of carrying people. Then let someone carry you," he said. He reached for her, slowly enough that she could step away if she wanted to. She did not step away. His hands settled on her waist, and even through the layers of clothing, the contact blazed. He pulled her closer, gently, and she let herself be pulled. Her forehead came to rest against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, a deep percussion that seemed to sync with her own. The mate bond hummed between them, and it felt like warmth, like safety, like the first bite of bread after a week of hunger. She cried. She had not cried in years. Not when Sepha died. Not when the pack turned their backs. Not during the long, frozen nights in the cottage when the wind howled and the wood ran out, and she lay awake listening to Maren's labored breathing, wondering if tonight was the night she would go down and find the old woman still. She had not cried because crying was a luxury for people who had someone to cry to, and she had had no one. Now she had someone, and the tears came like a dam breaking, ugly and raw and endless. Kael held her. His arms came around her, massive, encompassing, and he held her against his chest while she sobbed into his shirt. He did not tell her to stop. He did not tell her it was okay. He just held her. When the crying finally subsided, she stayed pressed against him, breathing in the scent of pinong and iron and warmth, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek. "Better?" he asked. "No," she said, "but closer." His chest rumbled. She realized he was laughing. A low, quiet sound, almost involuntary, as if he had forgotten how, and his body was reminding him. The days at Stonecrest blurred together. Maren's condition stabilized under Dr. Sarah's care. The pneumonia receded slowly, reluctantly, pushed back by real medicine and consistent warmth and the ambient pack energy that filled the fortress like a low electrical current. Pack members came and went from the royal quarters, paying respects to the king's mother, and each visit seemed to restore something in Maren. Color in her cheeks, strength in her voice, a sharpness in her amber eyes that reminded Elara of the woman she must have been before the banishment broke her. Elara was given rooms near Maren's suite. Real rooms with real beds and a bathing chamber with hot water that came from pipes in the walls. The first time she bathed, she sat in the hot water for an hour, just sitting, just feeling the heat soak into muscles and joints that had been cold for so long they had forgotten what warmth was. When she finally stood and dried herself and looked in the mirror, she saw someone she did not recognize. The hollows in her cheeks were still there, but they were less severe. Her skin, washed clean for the first time in longer than she cared to think about, was surprisingly clear, with a warmth to it that she had never noticed under the layers of grime and exhaustion. Her grey eyes, which she had always thought of as dull, were lighter than she remembered, almost silver. She braided her hair, which was still lank but cleaner than it had been in months, and put on the clothes that had been left for her. Simple, but well made. A soft grey dress, wool stockings, leather shoes that fit. She ran her hand over the fabric and thought of the thin, stained dress she had worn for 3 years, and something shifted inside her. Not healing. Not yet. But the beginning of healing. The first moment when you realize that the thing you accepted as permanent was actually just circumstance. Kael was in his study when she found him. The room was large, lined with maps and books, a fireplace burning steadily in one wall. He sat behind a desk covered in documents and looked up when she entered, and his reaction was visible. His eyes widened. His hand, which had been reaching for a quill, stopped mid-motion. He stood. "Elara," he said, and nothing else. She was suddenly self-conscious. The dress was borrowed. The shoes were borrowed. She was standing in a king's study, looking like a cleaned-up version of the ragged woman he had found on a frozen doorstep. And she did not belong here. She did not belong in any of this. And the urge to retreat was so strong that she actually took a half-step backward. "Do not," Kael said. His voice was soft but firm. Do not run from me. I was not running. You were about to. She looked at the floor. He came around the desk and stood in front of her. He was wearing a simple shirt, the sleeves rolled to his forearms, and without the coat and the armor, he looked less like a king and more like the man underneath, broad, scarred, exhausted. I need to tell you something, he said. Something about the flowers. Elara looked up. I sent a sample of the flowers from your garden to the keeper of the old texts at the archive of Moonscript. She confirmed what I suspected. Mother's grave flowers are not a metaphor. They are not named for funerals. They are named because they grow from the spiritual root system of the first lunar line. The original she-wolf, the one who birthed the packs, left fragments of herself in certain bloodlines. Those fragments manifest as the flowers. They grow where the lunar bloodline walks, lives, sleeps. He paused. They grow from your garden, Elara, not from the cellar, from the soil directly beneath the room where you slept. The flowers follow you. Not my mother, not my. Elara's breath caught. The keeper ran your description through the old texts. An abandoned infant, no known parents, no wolf at the shift ceremony, grey eyes that turn silver in certain light, an affinity for healing plants, an ability to read the first language without training. He looked at her steadily. These are markers of a lunar descended from the direct line. Your wolf is not absent. She was dormant, deliberately suppressed, likely at birth, by someone who wanted to protect the bloodline from being discovered and exploited. Elara opened her mouth, closed it. The room seemed to tilt. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the fortress, a clock struck the hour. You are telling me I am. She could not finish the sentence. I am telling you that you may be the last direct descendant of the first Luna, Kael said. And I am telling you that the mate bond between us is not a coincidence. The first Luna's line was always bound to the strongest alpha of the age. It is the oldest bond in our history. She shook her head. This is insane. It is, he agreed. And yet the flowers bloom. She looked at her hands, the same cracked, calloused hands that had scraped broth from a pot and packed wounds with yarrow and carried a dying woman on her back through frozen woods. The hands of a nobody. A wolfless omega. A girl who had been stepped around for her entire life. I do not feel like a Luna, she said. You feel like someone who has spent her entire life caring for others and has forgotten what it is like to be cared for, Kael said. That is not weakness, but it is something I intend to correct, if you will let me. He held out his hand, palm up, open, a gesture of invitation, not command. She looked at his hand, at the scars across his knuckles, at the broad, warm palm that had held hers through the night at the way station. She placed her hand in his. The mate bond surged, not a hum this time, a roar, a full-throated, body-shaking wave of warmth and recognition and rightness that started in their joined palms and radiated outward until Elara felt it in her teeth, in the roots of her hair, in the soles of her feet. Something inside her chest, something that had been sleeping since birth, stirred. She felt it. For the first time in her life, she felt it. Not a full awakening, not a shift, but a presence, a warmth, a pair of eyes opening in the dark interior space she had always believed was empty. Her wolf was there, had always been there. Dormant, yes. Suppressed, yes. But there. Waiting, patient, old. Kael's eyes flared amber. His wolf recognized hers. She could feel it through the bond, a surge of fierce, possessive joy from the beast inside him, a recognition that went deeper than words, deeper than thought. Two wolves, finally finding each other across years and distance and silence. "There you are," Kael murmured. His free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone, and the touch was reverent, careful, as if she were something precious that he was afraid of breaking. "There I am," she whispered. 2 weeks passed. Maren grew stronger. Elara grew stronger. The bond between her and Kael deepened daily, a vine growing through the walls they had each built around themselves, finding cracks, widening them, letting light in. They did not rush. That was the part that surprised Elara most. She had expected a king, an alpha king, to demand, to claim, to act with the urgency and possessiveness that his nature required. And the possessiveness was there. Oh, it was there. She could feel it in the way his eyes tracked her across a room, in the way his jaw tightened when other males spoke to her, in the way his wolf rumbled, low and constant, whenever she was near, a sound she could feel through the mate bond like distant thunder. But he did not push. He waited. He gave her space to recover, to eat, to sleep, to sit in the heated gardens and read the books from the royal library, and relearn what it felt like to have a body that was not in constant survival mode. He ate meals with her. He walked with her in the gardens. He sat with her by Maren's bedside in the evenings, listening to his mother tell stories about the old days, about the first wolves, about the lunar line and its history. Maren's voice grew stronger each day, and her amber eyes, so like her son's, sparkled with something that Elara slowly recognized as hope. On the 14th night, Kael found Elara in the glass garden. She was sitting on a stone bench beneath a flowering cherry tree that had no business blooming in February, but was blooming anyway, its pale petals drifting down like snow. At her feet, a cluster of mother's grave flowers had pushed through the cultivated soil of the garden bed, their luminous petals glowing in the dark. They were growing everywhere she went now. In the hallway outside her room, in the courtyard where she walked each morning, in the cracks between the flagstones of the great hall. The fortress's gardener had given up trying to understand it and had taken to simply leaving them alone. Kael sat beside her on the bench, the cherry blossoms caught in his dark hair. "I need to tell you something," he said. She looked at him. "Alpha Gregor of Ashenmoor has responded to my summons. He is refusing to come to Stonecrest for the accounting. He sent a message saying that the internal affairs of his pack are not subject to royal oversight." He paused. He also said that any Omega or wolfless wolf on his territory is his property, and that if I have taken one, I should return her. Elara felt the cold move through her, despite the garden's warmth. "He is talking about me. He is talking about you." Kael's voice was carefully controlled, but his eyes were burning. "I have not been this close to killing someone in a very long time. What will you do?" "I will go to Ashenmoor. I will take a full contingent of Stonecrest warriors, and I will stand in Gregor's hall, and I will explain to him in very clear terms what happens to alphas who claim sentient beings as property." Kael paused. "I will also formally claim you as my mate, in public, before witnesses, so that no wolf in any territory can question your status or your protection." Elara's heart was hammering. She could feel it in her temples, in her wrists, in the hollow of her throat. "Kael," he looked at her. "I am not going to be claimed to make a political point," she said. His expression shifted. Something softened behind the gold. "No." He turned to face her fully on the bench. "You are going to be claimed because I love you, because my wolf has known you were ours since the moment I caught your scent through that cottage door, because you saved my mother's life, and you did not even know she was mine. Because you fed her before you fed yourself. Because you have not had a single person care for you since you were 13 years old, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making up for that." He paused. "And also, yes, because if Gregor thinks he can call you property, I will tear his throat out with my teeth, and I would like the legal standing to do it." Elara stared at him. Then she laughed. It came out of her like a cough, sudden and startling, and once it started, she could not stop. She laughed until her eyes watered, until her stomach hurt, until she was leaning forward on the bench with her face in her hands, and Kael was watching her with an expression of such bewildered tenderness that she laughed harder. "I am sorry," she gasped. "I am sorry. It is just... A year ago I was eating turnip ends in a freezing cottage, and now the Alpha King wants to rip someone's throat out over me, and I cannot." She wiped her eyes. "I cannot reconcile those two realities." "You do not have to," Kael said. His voice was low and warm and certain. "The first reality is over. This is the only one that matters now." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was gentle. His fingers lingered. "Will you let me claim you?" he asked. "Not as a king claiming a Luna. As a man asking the woman he loves if she will have him." She looked at him in the pale glow of the mother's grave flowers. This enormous, scarred, impossibly tender man who had ridden 600 miles on a rumor and wept on the floor of a root cellar and held her while she cried in a corridor, and never once, not once, treated her as less than she was. "Yes," she said. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding himself back with every ounce of discipline he possessed for 2 weeks, and whose discipline had just been given permission to fail. His hands came up to frame her face, tilting her head back, and his mouth found hers with a certainty that left no room for hesitation. He tasted like smoke and something sweet, and the mate bond exploded between them like a door blown open in a storm. Heat, light, the sense of coming home to a place she had never been, but had always known. Her wolf stirred again. Stronger this time. Elara felt the presence uncurl inside her chest, a warmth that spread through her body like sunlight moving across a floor. Not a shift. Not yet. But closer. So much closer. Kael pulled back. His eyes were full amber, his wolf right at the surface, and his breathing was ragged. "Your wolf," he said. "I can feel her. She is waking up." His forehead dropped to hers. "When you are ready, she will come, and she will be magnificent." "How do you know?" "Because I know you." The journey to Ashenmoor took 4 days. Kael brought 50 warriors, Ren at their head, and rode at the front of the column in full battle armor. The wolf's head clasp on his coat had been replaced by a crown of dark iron, simple, unornamented, but unmistakable. The crown of the Alpha King. Elara rode beside him. She wore the grey dress still, but over it someone had draped a cloak of deep blue wool lined with silver fur. The cloak bore no insignia. She was not yet officially Luna, but the warriors treated her as one. They bowed when she passed. They addressed her as my lady. And when she stumbled getting off her horse at the first rest stop, 3 of them lunged forward to catch her so quickly she did not even have time to fall. It was disorienting. After a lifetime of being invisible, being seen was like stepping from a dark room into bright sunlight. Maren stayed at Stonecrest under Dr. Sarah's care, but before they left, she had taken Elara's hand and pressed something into her palm. A small carved wolf, the size of a walnut, made of dark wood, with jointed legs attached by tiny brass pins. When you pulled the string at its belly, its legs moved in a walking motion. "One of Aldrich's," Maren said. "The last one he ever made. I kept it all these years. I do not know why. Maybe because it is proof that he was someone else once, before the shame ate him." She looked at Alara with those amber eyes. "Take it. Let it remind you that people are more than their worst selves, even the ones who hurt you." Alara had put the carved wolf in her pocket and carried it against her hip for the entire journey. Ashenmoor's main village was smaller than she remembered, greyer, a cluster of timber buildings around a central hall, the whole thing huddled in a valley between two ridges as if trying to hide from the sky. Alara had lived here for 16 years and had never thought of it as home. It had always been the place she was kept, not the place she belonged. Alpha Gregor met them in the courtyard of the central hall. He was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a ruddy face and small, calculating eyes. He wore his authority like a costume, every gesture slightly too broad, every word slightly too loud. He was not afraid of Kael. That was immediately clear. He was too stupid to be afraid. "Alpha King," Gregor said, his voice booming across the courtyard. "Welcome to Ashenmoor. I trust your journey was comfortable." Kael dismounted. His boots hit the frozen ground, and the sound echoed. He said nothing for a long moment, just looked at Gregor. And the look was worse than any words could have been. It was the look of a wolf measuring the distance to another wolf's throat. "You called my mate property," Kael said. Gregor's smile faltered. It was a figure of speech. It was a declaration, one I heard clearly, as did every Alpha who received a copy of your message. Kael stepped forward. "Did you think I would not come?" "I did not think you would come for a wolfless Omega," Gregor said. His voice had lost some of its volume. Kael's head tilted, slightly, the way a wolf's head tilts before it strikes. "Then you misjudged the situation, badly. The accounting took place in the central hall. Kael sat at the head table, Alara beside him, and called the pack records. Gregor produced them reluctantly. They showed what Alara already knew. Omegas worked the lowest jobs, received the smallest rations, were excluded from pack gatherings and ceremonies. Wolfless members, those whose wolves never manifested or were too weak to shift, were classified as dependents. Property. The word was actually in the records. Property. Kael read the entry aloud. His voice was flat, controlled, more frightening than anger. "This ends today," he said. "Every pack in my territories will adopt the new Charter of Wolf Rights within 60 days. Any Alpha who classifies a pack member as property will answer to me directly." Gregor stood. "You cannot dictate how I run my pack." "I am not dictating." Kael set down the records. "I am informing you of the law that I, as your king, am enacting. If you have a problem with it, you have two options: comply or challenge me." The hall went silent. Gregor was not stupid enough to challenge the Alpha King. Not quite. His eyes moved to Alara, and in them she saw something she recognized. Contempt. The look he had always given her. The look every authority figure in her life had given her. The look that said, "You are nothing. You are taking up space. You are a burden." But for the first time, the look did not land. It slid off her like water off glass. Because she was sitting next to the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, and he was looking at her as if she were the most important person in the room, as if she were the only person in the room, and inside her chest, her wolf opened her eyes. The formal claiming ceremony was held that evening in the hall of Ashenmoor before the pack that had rejected Elara her entire life. Kael had insisted on this, not Stonecrest, not somewhere else. Here, where she had been discarded, where she had been invisible. Here, where everyone who had ever looked through her would be forced to watch as the Alpha King claimed her as his mate and Luna. The hall was lit by torchlight. The pack stood in rows, silent, watchful. Gregor stood to one side, his face like a closed fist. Falk stood behind him, his thin frame rigid, his eyes fixed on the floor. Kael stood at the center of the hall in his dark armor, the iron crown on his head. His golden eyes were fixed on the entrance. Elara walked in alone. She wore a simple white dress, provided by Stonecrest, and her feet were bare on the cold stone floor. It was tradition. The Luna walks to her mate as she is. No armor, no shoes, no pretense. Her hair was clean and braided in a crown around her head, and in the torchlight, her grey eyes shone silver. She walked the length of the hall. Every pair of eyes in the room was on her. She felt them. The pack members who had passed her from household to household, the elders who had declared her wolfless, the children who had thrown stones at her in the village because their parents had told them she was lesser. She walked past them all, and she did not look down. She reached Kael, and he took her hands. His were warm, steady. His eyes held hers, and in them she saw everything he had never said and did not need to say. She could feel it through the bond, the love, the reverence, the fierce protective certainty that this woman, this specific woman, was his, and he was hers, and nothing in any territory, in any world, would ever change that. He leaned down. His mouth found the curve of her neck, the soft skin where her shoulder began, and he pressed his lips there, gentle, almost reverent. Then his teeth grazed the spot, and a shiver ran through her entire body. "Do you accept this claim?" he asked. His breath was warm against her skin. "I accept." His teeth pressed down, slowly, carefully. Not enough to tear, but enough to break the skin, enough to leave a mark that would scar, that would stay, that would announce to every wolf who ever caught her scent that she was mated, bonded, claimed. The mark burned, not with pain, with heat, with the mate bond surging through the point of contact like a current, flooding her body with warmth and light and the overwhelming sense of belonging, of home. And then her wolf woke up. Not a stirring this time, not a flutter, a full awakening, a force rising inside her chest like a wave, massive and ancient and irresistible, filling every empty space she had ever known, pouring into the hollow places like light into a dark room. The air in the hall shifted. The torches flickered. Every wolf in the room felt it. A pressure, a presence, something old and powerful and unmistakable. Elara's eyes blazed silver, and the floor of the hall, the cold stone floor where she stood barefoot, cracked. From the cracks, flowers pushed through. Pale, luminous, 5-petaled flowers that spread outward from her feet in a widening circle, splitting the stone, forcing their way through solid rock, blooming in defiance of season and material and every natural law. Mother's grave flowers. Dozens of them. Hundreds. The hall erupted in gasps. Wolves dropped to their knees, not because they were ordered to, because their wolves recognized what they were seeing. The first Luna line, the direct bloodline of the original she-wolf, standing in their hall, mated to their king. Gregor's face went chalk white. Kael lifted his head from her neck. His eyes were full amber, blazing. His wolf so close to the surface that the shadow of the beast was visible behind his features. He looked out over the hall, over the kneeling wolves, over the flowers spreading across the floor. Then he looked at Elara, and the fierceness in his expression broke open into something raw and real and utterly unguarded. He said nothing. He just took her face in his hands and kissed her. In front of the pack, in front of the torches, in front of the flowers that bloomed from nothing, because she was standing there. When he pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, she heard him breathe a single word, "Mine," and she felt, for the first time in her life, that the word was true. The aftermath was swift. Gregor submitted to the new charter under what might generously be described as extreme persuasion. Kael did not harm him. He did something worse. He stripped Gregor of his alpha status and appointed a council of pack elders to govern Ashenmoor until a new alpha could be elected. Gregor was allowed to remain in the territory as a common wolf. No banishment, no scars, just the quiet, devastating punishment of irrelevance. Falk retained his position on the council, to Elara's surprise. When she asked Kael about it, he shrugged. "Falk is not evil," Kael said. "He is small. He followed the system because the system rewarded him for following it. Take away the system, and he will follow the new one just as faithfully. Men like Falk do not need to be destroyed. They need to be redirected." Elara thought of the moment of shame she had seen on Falk's face at the cottage, the flicker that had passed so quickly. Perhaps Kael was right. Perhaps some people needed the mirror more than the sword. They returned to Stonecrest. Maren was sitting up when they arrived, color in her cheeks, a cup of real tea in her hands. When she saw Elara's claiming mark, she smiled, and for a moment, the 12 years of banishment and suffering fell away, and she looked like the woman she had been. Proud, warm, alive. Elara sat beside her bed and told her everything. About the flowers, about the lunar line, about the claiming ceremony, and the way the hall had cracked beneath her feet. Maren listened with her amber eyes shining. "I knew," she said. "From the moment you picked me up in the woods, I could feel it. The old power. It was sleeping so deeply in you that no one could detect it. But I am old, and I have old eyes, and I could see the glow of it beneath your skin like embers under ash. Why did you not tell me?" Maren's hand found hers. "Because you needed to find it yourself. Power that is handed to someone sits on the surface. Power that is awakened from within goes to the bone. And you needed it in your bones, child, for what is coming." Elara frowned. "What is coming?" But Maren just squeezed her hand and said, "Not today. Today we celebrate. Today my son has a mate, and I have a daughter, and these old bones are warm for the first time in 12 years. That is enough for one day." Spring came to Stonecrest, and the mother's grave flowers spread. They grew along the pathways Elara walked, in the cracks of the courtyard stones, along the windowsills of the royal quarters. They climbed the walls of the fortress like luminous ivy, and at night the entire castle glowed with a soft, pale light that could be seen from miles away. Wolves came from other territories to see them. They stood in the courtyard and stared and whispered, the Luna of the old line, the first in 200 years, mated to the Iron Wolf. Elara grew into her role slowly. She was not a queen by training. She did not know diplomacy or court protocol or the correct way to address a visiting alpha's third cousin, but she knew how to listen. She knew how to see pain in a face that was trying to hide it. She knew how to sit with someone who was hurting and simply be present, and she knew herbs. She turned the glass gardens of Stonecrest into the most advanced healing facility in the Northern Territories. Wolves came from every pack to be treated. Elara trained apprentices, wrote treatment guides in the old language, and developed new remedies that combined traditional herbalism with the knowledge she found in the ancient texts of the lunar line. Her wolf grew stronger daily. She had not fully shifted yet. Dr. Sarah believed it would happen in its own time, that a wolf suppressed since birth needed time to grow into its full form. But the presence inside her was constant now, a warm, steady companion that observed the world through Elara's silver eyes and communicated in feelings rather than words. On the first night of spring, Elara stood in the garden that grew above Maren's old root cellar, in the cottage on the edge of Ashenmoor territory. Kyle had ordered the cottage preserved, not as a monument or a shrine, as a reminder. The garden was a blaze of mother's grave flowers. They had consumed every inch of soil, a field of pale luminescence that stretched from the cottage wall to the edge of the woods. In the moonlight, they looked like a sea of fallen stars. Maren stood beside her, leaning on a cane but standing, breathing the cold spring air. Alive. Kyle stood behind Elara, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on the top of her head. His breath was warm against her hair. She leaned back into him, felt the solid wall of his chest, felt his heartbeat against her spine, steady, certain, hers. The flowers swayed in a wind that was not wind, a ripple passing through them like a breath, as if the earth itself were exhaling. Maren reached down and plucked a single bloom. She held it up to the moonlight, and its petals glowed between her fingers. She planted this garden, Maren said softly. Not you, child. Not me. The first Luna. She planted it thousands of years ago, in every place where her daughters would one day walk. She knew you would come here. She knew you would need light in the dark. Maren placed the flower in Elara's palm. Elara looked down at it. 5 pale petals, a center like a tiny sun, warm against her skin. Kale's arms tightened around her. Somewhere in the distant tree line, a wolf howled. Then another. Then a chorus, rising through the pines, filling the night. Inside Elara's chest, her wolf lifted her head and answered.